Well, is it the will of the committee to adopt the motion?
OK, carried.
Wonderful.
Je déclare donc la motion adoptée et M. John Paul Danko officiellement élu.
Mr. John Paul Danko is officially the vice chair of the committee. Congratulations.
Congratulations. We're going to get right to our meeting. We only have the minister till 4:35, so we're going to get right to the opening statement. Colleagues, just a couple things. As we're aware, I normally let our speaking engagements go a bit long if we're in getting a good response, but because we're tight on time, I'm going to cut everyone off, so please watch your own clocks to avoid being cut off. And just very quickly, a point of orders. We're getting into an area of a lot of debate about a point of order, so that we're not tying up our committee time. I just ask everyone, please stick to procedural point of orders, and if you have a debate issue that you disagree with the other side, save your speaking time to address that so we don't tap our committee. We'll go right to Minister Lightbound. Welcome back, sir. The floor is yours for 5 minutes, and speak fast, and we'll try and get you out on time.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair and committee members. Thanks for having me again at OGGO. It's a pleasure to be here. Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs, membres du comité.
Chair, members of the committee, thank you for having me today to discuss the budget for SPAC and for Shared Services Canada. We often talk about the programs, we talk about policies, decisions, but behind it all, there's something even more fundamental. It's how the state works. For us, we're talking about paying civil servants, managing real estate, contracts, and also making online services work. That's exactly what we're doing with PSPC and everything else. They're not services like every others. They are key for the government to work for 2026-2027. PSPC has a $5.9 million dollar budget, $5.9 billion budget. We're reducing our budget. These numbers show that we're making choices. It's a difficult context. There are high expectations, costs are going up, and there are real risks. But faced with that, our responsibility is clear and simple. Continue on delivering the goods for Canadians and doing so rigorously. The PSPC's biggest variation is a $1.2 billion decrease linked to infrastructure because many of the large projects under our responsibility are coming to an end. There are also operational costs, and we are cutting red tape. We're streamlining processes and focusing on our essential mission. But there are things we can't slow down. Behind each transaction, there's a civil servant that serves Canadians at our airports, our ports, our military bases all over Canada. PSPC pays an enormous amount of civil servants. That's a huge responsibility, and it's a question of respect for those that make Canada work. They need to be paid on time. These expenses have decreased by $57 million, and we've put money aside to build a new pay system. Our duty is to make sure civil servants are paid and that they're paid on time and that they have a reliable system for that. For Shared Services Canada, it's just as key. As you know, the digital infrastructure of the government, our networks, but also cybersecurity. With a decrease in $128 million, the ministry is continuing to make investments for fundamental infrastructure and to head off cybersecurity threats. Cybersecurity landscape has changed quite a lot and is constantly evolving, and we need to be able to remain capable of meeting that rapidly evolving landscape. We're finding efficiencies where possible. We're protecting what is essential. We're investing where there are higher risks to make sure that we can deal with any eventuality. These systems may be invisible for many Canadians, but a lot of us depend on that infrastructure, and some of them are highly dependent upon that infrastructure, so I won't take up any more of your time. I know there are questions that have been prepared, so thank you so much for your time. And it would be a pleasure to respond to your questions. Or perhaps I'll just also mention that my assistant minister is here from PSPC, and Scott Jones and Scott Davis from Shared Services Canada are also here with me. Thank you, Chair.
Start with Mrs. Block for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome here, Minister and departmental staff. It's good to have you back. I look forward to hearing what it is you have to share with us based on the questions. Minister, you appeared before this committee last year and said your department was preparing for a comprehensive review of all current and planned federal contracts to identify cost reductions. How much have you identified in savings from that exercise?
Oui, merci beaucoup, Madame Bloch. Si on regarde l'examen exhaustif des dépenses qui a eu cours dans tous les
Thank you very
ministères,
much, Mrs. Bloch. So the exhaustive, the CER is being undertaken. That's $142 million over 4 years of savings, and more for the years to come that were ID'd in the context of the CER. We're seeing where we can make efficiencies and centralizing certain functionalities within the department. And it shows the government's desire to spend less and invest more, and also invest in a healthy management of public funds. So the CER, that's $142 million over 4 years of savings.
So spending less, and yet the deficit remains the same or has even grown. Minister, we heard from Canada Post that, and I'm going to quote, given the government's direction, they are moving forward on their transformation plan that they had submitted to you quite a number of months ago. You are the minister responsible for Canada Post. Were you the individual who approved the first phase of Canada Post's plan? And if so, why was your name not associated with the decision? It's my understanding you had put out several press releases, and in fact, I recall many of them, where you outlined that the situation was dire, but we have not heard anything from your office on this.
Oui, il y a plusieurs choses. C'est vrai que
So it's true that Canada Post is under my responsibility. I'm not in charge of day-to-day operations. I help make the broad lines of that policy. So what I said is that going forward, there have been moratoriums for decades that prevents Canada Post from making necessary changes to avoid losses of $6 billion since 2018. And so what I told Canada Post was that first, we are removing the moratorium on closing post offices. You can move to community mailboxes, and that's what...
Minister, because it was reported on the expectations that you outlined for Canada Post last fall. So we're very aware of what you called on them to do, which I recognize they are arm's length. They are an arm's length corporation, and yet you told them what they needed to do in order to become solvent, and you required a strategic plan or a transformational plan that you would then approve so that they could move forward. So while they're arm's length, you've held them somewhat hostage to being able to move forward by first not approving a strategic plan for years, and now PSPC. There were 5 years that a strategic plan was not approved. Now they've been waiting for this. We've been waiting to hear if their transformational plan has been approved, and we have not heard that yet. I'm just going to ask you another question. How many postal workers will be laid off as a result of the transformational plan?
Mais juste si je peux revenir.
I just need a number.
If I may, As I told you, I'm not in charge of day-to-day operations, but I can tell you this. Yes, it's true that I was very involved in Canada Post because, in my opinion, it's unacceptable for a business to lose $10 million a day. And their business model, it's true in Canada, it's true in the US, it's true all over the West, the business model simply does not work anymore. Now, regarding the number of employees, from what I understand,
that it is unacceptable to have Canada Post losing that much money. But I would say that some of the blame should be laid at the feet of PSPC and the ministers who have served in that role over the last number of years for not being willing to approve a strategic plan and make some of the hard decisions that needed to be made. So can you tell me how many postal workers will be laid off as a result of the transformational plan?
So just to answer, I'm very proud to be part of a government, a new government that is willing, ready, willing, and able
I just need a number. I need to know that you know the number.
On which I think we agree on the future of Canada Post. As far as the number is concerned, the operations of Canada Post I'm not in charge of on a day-to-day basis. However, my understanding is that as the organization right-sizes itself, most of it will be through attrition.
To provide the number for you, because it's been reported, 30,000 postal workers will be losing their jobs. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Block. Go to Mr. Danko for 6, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good to see you, Minister. A year ago, Canadians elected a serious and pragmatic government, and one of the most important things that we can deliver is trust and confidence in the federal government and ensure that we are strategically using those public tax dollars that are entrusted to us. In your opening statement, you talked about the importance of the civil service, the value and respect of the jobs that they do, the importance of the jobs that they do to Canadians. So through you, Chair, my question is, what steps are you taking to ensure the strategic use of those tax dollars to reduce costs, to improve services, and to ensure that trust and confidence that residents have provided us with?
Merci beaucoup. C'est une excellente question.
Thank you very much for your excellent question. The importance of being efficient with public funds cannot be underestimated. We need Canadians to trust the government and their institutions. It's important for Canadians to see results and to know that their money is being well managed. For a year, if we look into what we've done in that respect, there are 2 prongs. First, there's a horizontal part where each department will be called to be more efficient and be more efficient in their own internal processes. In my department, over the last 4 years, we'll save almost $700 million. Shared Services Canada also sought out efficiencies, and that will allow us to save money, and that'll come out in, we will save $60 billion over the next 3 years. And now there's a vertical. Or rather, I meant to say vertical. There's a will now to look at a vertical way of what can be done. I am very proud to see that with Shared Services Canada, with PSPC, we're looking into initiatives to save money and using technological tools that all departments can use. For instance, a tool developed here in PSPC called GC Translate. That allows translation with a lot of expertise and very accurately, and much more cheaply, the fantastic amount of documents that the federal government is called upon to translate, and that will be able to apply it in a horizontal manner. It's a very considerable saving. And that's what we want. That's the kind of savings that we want to see all over the public service.
I wanted to build maybe on your answer to that question further to the value of the services that the civil servant provide. Having worked in municipal government for a while, seeing the dedication, the commitment that members that work in the public service provide. How are the actions that you and your department are taking, respecting that value that the civil service gives to Canadians?
Je pense que j'en ai fait allusion un peu dans mes
I mentioned this briefly in my opening remarks. One of our priorities, that I'm in charge of in my department, is to ensure that the pay system works well. Everyone in Canada knows what's happened over the last 10, 12 years with Phoenix. We've seen that there's been a reduction of backlogs. And that reduction is continuing to diminish month over month. And just as important, we're transitioning to a new payment system. We're learning from past mistakes, and we're going one step at a time to ensure that everything is working correctly and avoiding what we did with Phoenix, which was everything all at once. So my priority is to reduce the backlog and ensure a smooth transition and ensure that our civil servants are paid on time, and we depend on those civil servants.
Wanted to switch to the use of consultants within the federal government, within the civil service. I worked as a consulting engineer for many years. Oftentimes when we're hiring consultants in the public sector, they're experts in the field. So my question to you is, what level of consultants are working in engineering and architecture versus in management or financial? And when we do hire external consultants, what consideration does your ministry take to determine whether that job can be done in-house or we need to go to hire an external consultant?
Ouais, c'est une bonne question qui a fait couler.
Good question. It's featured heavily in the news. There are lots of different categories of external consultants. We must be aware that in my department, PSPC, most external consultants, they're construction and engineering firms that help us with major projects, not just for the parliamentary side, also decontaminating polluted sites. So external management consulting companies are a really teeny tiny portion of that. And in terms of our external contracts for management, we've reduced that number by 36%. And Shared Services Canada has reduced it by 65%. And it represents a really small percentage of consultants. And we really mostly use consultants for architectural or engineering reasons, for instance. I don't know, perhaps if Ariane, you have anything to add?
Past our time, so no, you have nothing to add. We'll go to Madame Gaudreau, please, for 6.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for being here. Thank you all for being here. I'll start with digital providers, service providers. $17 million, rather $3.17 million for American providers. Have you considered Canadian and Quebec IT providers to reduce our dependence on the United States? 100%. 100%. It won't always be possible, but overall, we want to build these infrastructure here in Canada, in Quebec, and we want to encourage Canadian innovation. And I'll take the opportunity to talk about a policy I'm very proud of. Since December, for contracts of over $25 million, the Buy Canadian policy applies for almost all governmental contracts. And this policy has two main criteria. One, you need a Canadian provider. So we give an advantage to Canadian providers, and we look at the real economic activity. But the most important thing is that we're giving points for Canadian content. That can be research, R&D, jobs. So that is key because, yes, sometimes providers that are foreign providers but have a real presence in Canada, well, that's important to take into account. think of IBM Canada. I visited their facilities in Bromont. They have 1,000 employees. All that to say, what we want is to encourage investment here in Canada and businesses here in Canada, and that's what informs that policy. All right, so I'll ask another question in the same vein. Alto. Is Alto subject to that Buy Canadian policy, yes or no? Alto, yes, where possible, but as it's a consortium, it's a bit different. However, what does that mean? Because people want to know. Yes, so generally it should apply to Alto because all state businesses are subject to it. The only caveat is that the production capacity must be possible here in Canada, clearly. But the goal behind it is to say where we have the capacity to do it, we want it to be in Canada. Because if we look into all of the components, often we're looking at a system. I'm not a specialist, but I know in Quebec, for instance, all the component parts are, well, this is my fear, that the announcements would be, oh, we bought Canadian because we bought drills at Canadian Tire. But can we have written down, because there are people listening right now, as you know very well, people in, if I talk to Via Rail, for instance, they want to know that those policies are respected and that those policies show. So it's been in place since December 16th. And so since December 16th, that policy has applied, and it's true for the department, and it's also true for Crown corporations. And this is perhaps linked. One of the issues is that we can look into supply in the past. Well, it's having an address in Canada. Now what we want is to not just have an address in Canada. You need to have real economic activity here in Canada. Steel, aluminum. We want aluminum. We want Canadian materials as well. Chair, I would also like details on the percentages. I'd like to know about the criteria as well. That's the subject on everyone's lips. And the major directions. And so what are we to do? What are we going to tell them? Well, we're saying the better they are, the better their chances of winning a government contract. Have you established specific targets for economic benefits for Quebec in terms of contracts, local content, and jobs? With the Buy Canadian policy? Well, it depends. I can't invent needs. It's according to the needs of our departments and our clients. For instance, the Coast Guard, the Navy, the different departments of transports, or Crown corporations. Since the policy has come into force, more than $500 million was attributed to contracts subject to the Buy Canadian policy. And around $3.5 billion worth of offers were submitted. 30 seconds. Oh, well, I don't want to cut you off, but if we look all the markets in Canada, that shows the importance of the Buy Canadian policy. All of the levels of government, well, that's about 14% of the GDP, and that's where the Buy Canadian policy is really, really relevant. Well, I'll ask more questions later. Thank you, Chair.
Answer for 5, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And that was a great round of questions from Madame Goudreau. Very well done. And I'm going to pick up on a couple themes that she had, Minister. When it comes to the Buy Canada bit there, I actually had a town and a mayor reach out to me because they received a bill payment for rental for a Canada Post space from Utah, from a company operating out of Utah. And I'm just wondering, is that standard procedure that you would send bill payments from a contractor out of the United States to pay for a Crown Corporation's rental space?
Donc, juste pour être sûr de comprendre,
I just want to make sure I understand. Are you talking about Canada Post that sent that receipt?
The payment for the rental space by Canada Post to the town was paid for by a third-party provider out of Utah to pay for the rental space for the Crown Corporation from the town of Leader. Is that standard practice?
Je peux pas vous parler, je pense que ce serait une question à...
I can't speak to that. I think that question would be better asked to Canada Post. The policy by Canadian, for the time being, applies to contracts over $25 million, so I can't be more specific. But over the spring, it'll apply to contracts of $5 million and more. So it'll increase the scope of the policy. And as I mentioned earlier, it's been in place since December 16th. So for this specific case, I would invite you to ask a question to Canada Post, and hopefully they can answer you.
Low-hanging fruit like that might be a simple way to, bring more things into within our own border, but particularly the optics of having a Crown Corporation sending payment through a third provider from Utah is probably not a good look for the government when you're trying to go down this Buy Canada pathway. I'm going to switch to another point here. Canada Post has basically told this committee and has told Canadians that they will not participate in the gun buyback confiscation program that your government is going through. Now, the government is going ahead with this program despite objections from groups like Canada Post. Now, the government has hinted at using Canada Post as a means to collect firearms from people, but Canada Post has said no. Are you going to respect Canada Post's decision, or are you going to force Canada Post to go ahead with this program?
Moi, par rapport à ça, il y a des décisions qui ont...
Decisions were made regarding the long gun, the gun buyback, and I don't think that Canada Post is involved.
Okay, well, I guess we'll watch and see what happens with that. The spring update wants to bring back search and seizure for small mail. It was included in Bill C-2. It was that bill obviously did not proceed. Bill C-12 came in its place, but the search and seizure of mail was dropped. But the spring update brings it back. Are you going to see that happens, or are you going to take the cue from Canadians who'd said no to that measure and asked it to be removed? What's the plan here?
Eu égard au petit paquet de...
Regarding small mail, so letters, first, it fulfills requests of from the police, because we know there can be a small quantity of drugs that have considerable lethal effects. So it's to respond to their inability to selectively open mail that might contain those substances, for instance, with fentanyl. So it's mostly based on what we heard on the ground. In my opinion, it's in order to protect Canadians.
There's a process to get a warrant to be able to access that mail, and that process already currently exists. So what is going to be the threshold then, Minister, for reasonable suspicion to open Canadians' mail?
Mais pour nous, comme je le mentionnais tout à l'heure, c'est que...
As I said earlier, for the time being, the police officer has to wait to go to someone's house if they have a reasonable doubt. We want police to have the authority in order to safely verify mail. And this is a file that was brought up by police many times.
Justifies having Canada Post open people's mail, right? Like the police can get a warrant and they could do so, but again, Canadians want to know if you're going to proceed with this, what's the threshold for that letter to be opened prior to it arriving at somebody's house?
Comme je le mentionnais, c'est d'avoir la possibilité de le faire.
As I mentioned, it's having the possibility to do so. What's not planned which is not possible at the time being, and police have asked because not opening the mail represents a danger.
For 5.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci, Monsieur le
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. My questions are regarding AI. AI clearly has major transformational potential and, as we all know, major risks.
Me to understand, what is our framework for thinking about appropriate application of artificial intelligence as we try to modernize the public service and save money in ways that are responsible for Canadian taxpayers?
Ouais, ben c'est d'abord content de vous retrouver ici.
Well, first, it's a pleasure to see you here again. Thank you for the question. I think that is a key question. I think it is fundamental for the government to carefully adopt AI in our processes. On the one hand, internal processes from the back office that require us to integrate AI, and also what Canadians see in services that they get from the government. And it's important to do so in a visible way. How data is processed, how transactions are made, what the AI is basing itself on. Are we using it as an assistant for civil servants? How are we using AI? Where is the AI data? And where's the machinery behind it all? We need absolute control on those processes. I'm working on that with the TBS on implementing AI, and there's already a policy from the Treasury Board that provides some guidelines. From an operational point of view, as Shared Services Canada, how do we arrive in departments that have their own ways of doing things? How can we break down those silos and find common solutions for the whole government? At my left, there's someone who's really looked into the issue, the president of Shared Services Canada. Scott, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre.
Thank you.
Is that there is a policy on the responsible and effective use of AI, but also a number of ways that we make sure that it's free of bias, that it's being used effectively. You can reproduce the decisions that are made and understand why it's making these decisions. And so all of that together gives a framework for this. There's also the transparency that comes with the AI registry, where we're using AI, how we're applying it. And then also running it on sovereign Canadian infrastructure so that when it's making inference, it's done on Canadian, in Canadian data centers, on Canadian infrastructure, using Canadian technology so we know how it's being done. And then the expertise that comes with understanding that, making sure that that's in-house by public servants to know how this is running and working with Canadian companies.
Thank you. Because that was my next question, actually related to data protection, because I think we all would agree that it's critically important as we learn from and experiment with these technologies that we ensure that our data is kept here and that Canadians can have faith that will be the case. So thank you for that reassurance. I think we all know that there will also be an asymmetric impact on the workers of the Canadian Public Service as we implement these new technologies. And I'm just wondering if you could speak a little bit more about there are some, as you say, back office and other kinds of functions. There may be higher level functions not too long from now that may be taken up by, perhaps none of us will have a job. But anyway, when that day comes, thinking about how to protect, retrain, offer other opportunities as those asymmetric impacts make their way through the public service, is that something that we're thinking about?
Définitivement, puis juste à ce chapitre.
100%. And to speak to that, I can see the potential of the use of AI in the civil service. I see it as a way to improve the quality work done by our civil servants. And I think many want to have the right tools in order to avoid doing repetitive tasks that AI could take over. And last week, I met the Minister Glubich in the Department of Information Technology. They created an AI academy for their civil servants so that they can learn how to use AI tools efficiently. And it's highly in demand. And I think that kind of initiative will be very useful going forward.
Thanks very much. Madame Gaudreau for 2.5.
I just want to make sure that this is clear and that I've understood correctly. When I talked about ASTOM, which is in 2 areas of Quebec, Quebec and Ontario, the goal is to bring talent out. We have talent, we have expertise. will Alto be obliged to comply with the Buy Canadian policy? Because there's no factory in Canada. The equipment ordered by Mr. Bernaud were built in California. Via Rail wants to redo their trains outside of the Quebec-Windsor corridor. Can we be sure that the workers, be they from La Pocatière or Thunder Bay, can we ensure that the workers will be the ones to create those trains? Regarding Alto, I think it's a bit premature for multiple reasons. First, Alto is still really in the starting steps, and it's not technically under my department. However, if we want to take a concrete example, the idea behind Buy Canadian, the Buy Canadian policy, I was really happy in January to be in La Pocatière to announce the contract for buying the Toronto Metro cars, and those cars will be, or rather, those buses will be built in La Pocatière. And part of them will be built in Ontario as well. In my opinion, that kind of contract that was awarded is Buy Canadian in action. That's a kind of solidarity that we need to have. For you, it's just Quebec. For me, it's beyond Quebec, but throughout the country, while we're dealing with unfair, illegal tariffs from the Canadians, having this economic solidarity is key. And it was just wonderful to see the Vancouver SkyTrain in La Pocatière, to see the enthusiasm for the Toronto Metro. And in my opinion, that's a wonderful example of this policy. So transparency is planned, from what I understand, and I imagine, Mr. Chair, that we will have the opportunity to have the detailed breakdown, because our job is everything about the economic impact of government in Quebec and elsewhere. So are you committed to providing those details? It is my greatest pleasure to do so, but if you're talking about...
Get you out on time. Mrs. Jansen, for 5, please.
Yes, thank you. Just this week, we heard that your department has referred another individual to police, making it the 10th case of suspected procurement fraud referred to for criminal investigation. And I know at our meeting in December, I asked whether you could commit to including fraud data in your department result report. And I was quite surprised by your written response, which said that fraud detection data isn't included because it fluctuates and doesn't reflect performance. I just want to make clear, detecting and preventing fraud is a core part of the job, correct?
Absolument. Puis
Okay.
d'ailleurs, à ce chapitre-là, je trouve
Yes, absolutely. And at the time being, ensuring compliance of suppliers, well, we want to make sure that there's no illegal behavior on the part of our suppliers.
If fraud goes up and down significantly, you have all these new ways of catching these fraudsters, logically that would mean that fraud's something important to track and report regularly. Would you agree? It's a yes or no?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So help me understand why aren't we reporting this in that report? Why, if fraud is serious, we have a tip line, investigations, recover millions, and we refer cases to police. Why aren't we putting it in your performance report?
Je vais laisser ma sous-ministre prendre une partie de la réponse.
I'll allow my colleague to take part of this response. When we consider the actions of the department, especially this one that we're discussing, in some instances of fraud, suspected fraud, we take fraudulent behavior very seriously. It's really important to ensure the integrity of our system, and I'll allow my colleague to continue.
Is the latest referral related to the same pattern of subcontractor overbilling, or is it a different type of alleged fraud?
Madame Reza pour plus de détails.
It is overbilling fraud. It's been referred to the RCMP.
Okay, and when was PSPC first made aware of this case? When was it referred to the RCMP?
It was referred, I think, on April 16th of 2026, and we weren't made aware of it. We're constantly looking for the fraud detection that you advised. We found it. We cross-referenced it.
Jeez,
We
don't
found
speak too
criminal
loud
intent,
now.
and we immediately.
Do you know how much the value is?
Unfortunately, I don't have the value.
And how many more cases are currently under review that could result in RCMP referrals?
I'll have to come back with that number. There's always cases in flight that get acquitted or sent on, so I don't have a steady state number right now.
And can a supplier under active investigation, or, for procurement fraud still receive federal contracts?
It's compartmentalized so that we try to manage those that are focused in
Okay, so
flight
really quickly,
versus-
why is this not included in the report, the performance report? Why? I don't understand.
I think it's because there are so many new dashboards and fraud reporting obligations across government that we're looking at the best way to provide the information. So there is some public accounting format.
Is my time up? Oh, okay. Perhaps you can explain to me, if we have all these different dashboards, we're trying to figure out how to ensure that we know your actual, and I'm going to ask Mr. Lightbound, we're trying to figure out how to understand what kind of fraud is happening, and yet somehow or another it's not in your performance. Like, this is the core job that you have, it's part of your performance, and yet it's not given to parliamentarians as a performance report. That makes no sense to me. It doesn't matter how many dashboards you have. The report for Parliament should tell us what.
À ma connaissance, les cas qui ont été rapportés et qui ont été soumis aux autorités sont...
These were submitted to public authorities, and now we can improve in the way that we make that information accessible to parliamentarians, and I'll look into that. Or I'm interested in looking into that.
No, I realize there's an annual report. I'm asking, why isn't this in your department report? Because it's clearly performance. Like, if there's a huge fluctuation in finding these things, to me that's a performance issue, and that's what we're here to understand.
It's not necessarily a fluctuation in finding things. It's where there is fraud, we find it. So sometimes there'll be periods where there is no fraud found. Sometimes there'll be a stronger period of overbilling, and we are constantly looking at the control functions we're putting in.
And yet your wording was about fluctuation as to why we're not getting that in your department performance report.
Bon, comme à la base de Madame Jensen, l'information.
The information is public. There is a report. If we can make it more accessible for parliamentarians, as you said, it would be my pleasure.
Last week, or in December, when we asked, it was basically the answer we received was, "Oh, it's because it fluctuates." I don't understand that answer. That's a silly answer.
That is our time, but I know we have PSPC back on Thursday. Perhaps we can pursue it then. Mr. Gasparo, we'll finish with you, please.
Great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here. I'd like to go back and pick up from where my colleague left off in regards to management consultants. If I understand correctly, only about 1.9% of all federal contract spending last year was on management consulting. Is that correct?
Oui, c'est juste.
So to put that in context, then obviously roughly 98.1% of federal contract spending went to other purposes, right? It would just be basic
Oui,
math.
tout à fait.
Perfect. Just for those at home that need a calculator, just wanted to make sure. So that would include building and maintenance infrastructure, delivering IT systems, cleaning up contaminated sites, providing health services in remote and northern communities, and other operational necessities, correct?
Vous rendez mon travail facile.
Great. Perfect.
Gasparo.
You're making my work so easy, Mr. Gasparo.
So it would be fair to say then that the vast majority of federal contracting is not about management consulting, but actually about delivering tangible programs and services to Canadians. Is that correct?
Encore une fois, correct.
That's right.
Are there policies or controls in place to assess whether work should be done in-house versus contracted out before a consulting contract is approved?
Oui, absolument.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a reflex that's been developed over the last few years. And it shows when we look at that percentage, that small percentage, 1.8% of federal contracts. But when we look at the reduction year over year, 86% reduction in Shared Services Canada. And when we look throughout all departments, the reflex now should be to say, can we do it in-house? And sometimes it can be useful to work with external experts, but the reflex is really to do it in-house.
Great. How much time do I have, Chair?
2.5 minutes.
Great. I do just want to clarify one thing my colleague, Mr. Patzer, said earlier. The way the law is currently worded, police are unable to issue a warrant for small parcels being delivered. The Canada Post Act does not allow even for the police to get a warrant to open up someone's mail. So I just wanted to correct that for the record. We are changing it, but as of now, not even a police warrant can intercept mail. So as the Parliamentary Secretary for Combating Crime, I just thought it was my obligation. Correct, yeah.
And that's a fair point. That goes to the reason why police would have to wait until mail is delivered until they can, act on a warrant, and that's the issue.
Correct. So it puts police officers at risk and puts others at risk. I just wanted to just say that. So just, sorry, I don't know how much time. Okay, great.
You're making my life even easier now, answering answering questions than I had in the past. So.
Yeah. Okay. So just to come back, just to finish off on the management consulting and the contracts. Overall, would you agree that the objective is not to eliminate consultants overall, but rather to perform essential services that we do not have in-house expertise with?
Oui, écoutez, so there are where we will always need outside expertise when we think of engineering, architecture, construction, where for large infrastructure projects, for instance, or decontamination of certain sites, we'll need outside expertise, that's for sure. However, when it comes to management consultants, we've done a great deal to reduce the use of outside consultants for management consultants, and the objective is to build the in-house capacity. But where needed, in some instances, it can, but the objective is to reduce it by which the results speak for themselves when you look at what PSPC and shared services have achieved.
Thank you, Chair.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We actually got caught up there. Minister and officials, thanks for being with us. We are going to excuse you. Can we do a quick 2-minute turnaround so we can bring in Treasury Board Minister, Treasury Board President Ali, and get started for the final hour? We're suspended.
Okay. Let me check the Security Committee because they'll probably be suspended as well just for 5 minutes while they bring in the ministers. They did start late, though. Yeah, they're still on a block round, so I'm assuming they'll just keep that going and then they'll pause. The House is doing a block opposition motion, and it just seems like it's only 2 people in there. Let me see. Maybe we can tune into the Health Committee in the meantime. You know what? Let's just tune into the Security Committee. We'll wait till they suspend, because then we can at least know exactly when they're suspending.
Out, so it's exceptional. There are not going to be many. He's not going to be overwhelmed.
Oh, not this translator.
The
this
Intelligence
is what I was
Commissioner.
about,
Confirm that. We told him, we gave him some initial numbers around what we thought, how many ministerial orders would come to him, and he was sufficiently satisfied that he could manage it.
OK, parfait. Parce que je sais qu'il y a pas...
Great, because I know that there has been no budget increase in his office to help him face the obligations that will flow from Bill C-22. Now, very quickly, you may not have time to answer my question, but why did you not put a clear definition for core provider in Part 2?
For core provider, we do have a definition. What we expect to do is run through the regulatory process where there will be classifications or classes.
Le projet de loi, Madame Engel, c'est laissé à la...
Sorry, I have to interrupt you. Mr. Caputo, you have 5 minutes.
It's been helpful to have the officials. I mean, one of the things I will say at the outset, I feel like we need 3 hours with you all. This is a highly technical bill, and you know, like I don't say this in jest. Like, we can't rush this. I've got a list of about 8 things I want to ask you about. I'm looking up case law further to Madame Belfay's earlier point about the threshold of reasonable grounds to suspect versus reasonable grounds to believe. I haven't studied reasonable grounds to suspect in years. Reasonable grounds to believe, I'm familiar with the Story decision that it must be, you know, that a person must subjectively believe what they're doing, and that must be objectively reasonable. That probably means nothing to a lot of people, but that's like, this is difficult things to comprehend. So when we're wrapping our heads around this, only having you here for 1 hour prior to clause by clause, I just think it's inadequate. I think we need you here a whole lot more, to be very candid. So I'll leave that with you and with the chair and with my Liberal colleagues, because we have lots of questions. I know I've just burned a minute here, but this is an important question where it comes to the requirement for a electronic service provider to retain data for 1 year. Is that a de facto seizure that runs contrary to Section 8? I understand that a search warrant is required. That would be the search. Normally there's the search and then the seizure, but is the compulsion to retain data itself a seizure?
I'll attempt to just simply say the expectation of the retention by a company, we have not equated that to a seizure within the context of an investigation, because there has been no production order approved by a judge or a warrant. That would be my simple assessment of the scenario. Any of your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the like you said, we need a judicial authorization in order to access that data. The timeliness of it is because there's a variety. There are companies that already retain this metadata, and there's not a consistent application of how that happens amongst telecommunication providers, which is what security and law enforcement would look for. But when we're looking to access that data, the reason the timeliness is because if they keep it for 3 days, but you're 1 week into a kidnapping investigation, that data is gone whether you are judicially authorized or not, whereas some companies have it readily available.
No, and I understand that. I'll tell you where I'm coming at this from. In this instance, the state or the government is compelling an action, and that action relates to information over which there is a reasonable expectation of privacy. That's why you need a warrant, right? So the moment you say, provider A, you need to keep this, well, there's a reasonable expectation of privacy over that which must be kept. Is everybody with me so far? Okay, does that not engage Section 8? I might be out to lunch here, but I've been asked this question, so it's something I'm looking to explore.
Just a point of clarity, Section 8 within Part 2 of...
Within Part 2, yes.
Fenton, do you want to jump in?
I think in terms of, obviously we've had discussions around charter statements and stuff about that. I think part of the analysis on that point will be how we actually circumscribe our use of metadata, right? In this case, we are not clearly looking, the maximum is 1 year. We're not saying blanket retention, so we would have to basically, in developing the regs and the things that we would have to, in that process, we'd have to prove that they're necessary, the proportion, and within that amount of time. So I think at that point we can sort of come to an understanding of what our charter obligations arise from that.
Okay, so let's go along that line here, because the 1 year is kind of the benchmark. Are you saying, and like we could talk about this for the next 15 minutes. This is, again, very important, and I've got 33 seconds. 1 year is the maximum, is what you're saying. It's not
the minimum. It's not just the drop dead date. It's only 1 year. Because to me, obviously any date is arbitrary. Like, why is it a year? Why is it not 9 months? Why is it not 15 months? Why is it not 2 years? Can you offer anything to help out this committee in terms of like why was a year picked?
So as I mentioned earlier, we have done a lot of country comparisons within our analysis. And so 1 year actually was quite common in being the average. Like I said, Australia is on the higher end with the 2 year. We also want to make sure that we're clear on what we are expecting to retain within the metadata context still needs to be defined. And the expectation is that there is some level of rationale as to maybe the metadata of me speaking with Fenton that's really important because then now I know who is talking to who, would be kept for a year while something around.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Madam Ogggo. We need to move to MP Elsfather for 5 minutes, please.
President, and always fascinating to listen to my colleague, Mr. Caputo. First of all, let me start by saying thank you so much for being here. I'm strongly in favor of this bill. As I said in the House, I think we need a modern access regime. I think we need to deal with Bykowitz and Spencer and have proper legislation that allows us to deal with things like this. But I also had a couple of questions, if it's okay, with respect to the way systemic vulnerabilities interplay in this bill in sections 5.5 and 7.5 of the bill versus sections 12 and 13. So basically what I understand from sections 5 and 7, I think it's 7.5 of the bill, is that a provider is not required to comply if a systemic vulnerability would be created. I think I have that right. But section 12, as I understand it, says that any electronic service provider that is subject to an order made under section 7.1 must comply with it. And then section 13 specifies that orders take primacy over the regulations that will be made. So I don't really understand personally the interplay here where we're saying that somebody is not required to comply if it creates a systemic vulnerability, but then if there's an order, they're required to comply with it, and then the order supersedes regulations. Can you talk me through this so that I understand how then 5.5 and 7.5 actually work?
Sure, I'll start off and I'll turn to my expert, Fenton, which is we have to consider this as a bit of a continuum where the baseline has to be that you need to, as a core provider, if it's regulation or if you're being tapped through a ministerial order, that you comply with this. Then there is the exception to, and as we go through this process with you to be able to determine how to get that information off of your networks, that it is determined that it is a systemic vulnerability, then there is the right to push back and from our company to push back and say, no, this is not going to, we can't give you the information we need unless because of a systemic vulnerability.
But if we want to say that, why would the bill itself not? I mean, right now we agree that an order is paramount and they must comply with an order, correct?
Yes. Baseline.
So under what circumstances, if the company believes that it would create a systemic vulnerability, is the company then able, unless it convinces the minister or those representatives of the minister to push back and say, no, this would create a systemic vulnerability? How come the bill as drafted doesn't say the order must be complied with, except to the extent that the company believes using reasonable commercial efforts it cannot do this without creating a systemic vulnerability or something like that? If the company believes this, but the minister's office is not accepting that argument, what happens to the company?
Within the context of a ministerial order specifically, I'll stay away from those who are...
I'm only asking about the ministerial order.
Okay. The expectation is that we, public safety would be responsible for actually completing the analysis that the minister considers. Therefore, we intake information from the operating agency that has flagged the issue with the threat that is existing within a company's system. And we actually are required to consult with that particular firm and satisfy a number of factors that are listed in the bill. And then, so as the company is with us through this process, they are able to voice their views. Once we get to the final stage, if the minister then approves the process, the intelligence commissioner has full disclosure of all of the information the minister had, and he also agrees with the process to advance. The company does have the right to a judicial review.
Okay, so at what point the company is told at that point that the minister, and the commissioner have said they must go forward regardless of their claim. So then they would go to judicial review. What happens until that review is heard? You're saying that there would be a stay on them requiring to carry out the order?
Fenton, would you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. Correct.
Oh, okay, sorry. Was that, you didn't have anything to add?
Oh, I didn't have anything to add, no.
Okay, I appreciate that.
And unfortunately, there is no more time either.
Sorry.
Thank you, Anthony, MP Housefather, for this intervention. We'll now move to MP Caputo for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you. Okay, I want to pick up on this 1-year retention period. So, if I understand it correctly, let's just say the metadata, I think that's generally what we're talking about here, or whatever is contemplated in Section 2 or Section 5, whatever, let's just say data here that can be compelled to be kept. My understanding of what was said before was that 1 year is the maximum, and 1 year was chosen because it's like an international standard. There's nothing magic about 1 year, and I understand that. Every number is arbitrary, but that not everything will be kept for 1 year. I'm clear on that?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Correct. So who decides what type of metadata will be kept for, say, well, this type of data only needs to be kept, this is an IP address or whatever. This only needs to be kept for 6 months. Who decides that?
That will be achieved through the regulatory process, for which we will develop analysis with the agencies as to what is the most valuable when it comes to investigative processes, as well as companies. We need to, when we're carrying out the regulatory process, we actually have to consider things like cost of implementing new regulations to an industry. So they would definitely be involved in what it means, whether, as Rick mentioned, sometimes they actually already have that data in their holding, and it's no new delta new cost to them. And in other cases, it might be significant. We need to take the time to be able to do that analysis and come back with a thoughtful scheme.
See, I guess to me that's on first blush I have an issue with that, and that is because you have to consider cost. You don't have to you don't have to make your decision based on cost. It is a consideration. But the other issue is that one of the principal discussion points surrounding this bill is how much is left to regulation. I mean, this bill essentially could operate on regulation 90% of it with ministerial orders and things like that. So, I mean, should we not be spelling things out more in the bill when it comes to certainty? You know, if you're a small electronic service provider trying to implement Part 2, are you not shaking right now in terms of thinking, oh my gosh, how much is this going to cost me to comply? Because there is no certainty here with what I'll have to comply with.
So let me tackle that last part of your question right up front, which is core providers are expected to also have go through a process by which we look at considerations of how big they are, how many customers they serve, so that it is unlikely that we would be regulating small business owners and operators through the core provider portion of this bill.
See, again, I go back to my prior point, which is that falls to regulation and it falls to somebody else's decision where there is a consideration about the size and the cost, but ultimately, just because that is considered doesn't mean that that core provider won't have to do what a ministerial order says. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying. I think part of why the bill has a higher level of detail than others that you may be thinking of is the fact is this is heavily based in technology, and using terms could be obsolete within a number of years, to which would render the whole bill actually useless. So
I appreciate that. I know that some things have to be left to regulation. My view is in a bill like this, where it could be as prescriptive as possible, it should be, because there is so much here that is left to regulation. So like, for instance, when I'm looking at a ministerial order, every ministerial order, as I see it under section, I believe it was 7, of Part 2, has to be approved by the Intelligence Commissioner. Is that accurate?
That's accurate.
Why not a federal court judge? I get it. They're both presumed independent. I assume the Intelligence Commissioner is presumed independent. Can't imagine why. Both are government appointed, right? Both are presumed to have perfect knowledge, and I think you know what I mean by perfect knowledge. They both presume to have all the knowledge. But a federal court judge is not beholden to the government. They aren't, air quote, hired. Their term isn't renewed, anything like that. They can sit till they're 75. So why not have a federal court judge play the role of gatekeeper rather than the Intelligence Commissioner when there is at least a perception or a reasonable perception of connection to government?
So before I flip it to Fenton, I just want to say within the ministerial order process, we have the Department of Public Safety doing the analysis. We have the minister approving. We do have the Intelligence Commissioner also approving, who is independent and a quasi-judicial oversight body, and then there can be a JR. So we've literally, he's on the judicial side, that's the only entity we've left out.
And I would add at the end of that, we've been Sarah, but I think the Intelligence Commissioner is well versed because he's used, or she is used to doing lots of things like ministerial authorization for CSE, justification framework for CSIS. So they're well versed in these particular issues, right? So they have the knowledge, and from that point, they can actually do that function well.
Thank you. Sorry, MP Caputo. We have run over the time, and we are going to suspend now since we have seen the ministers enter the room. So thank you, officials. Many of you will stay. Et on reprend dans quelques...
Okay, perfect. So we're getting the ministers in. I can't imagine they suspend for more than 5 minutes. Let's tune into the House while we wait. And then we've got an hour of ministers, and that's it for today.
We believe in the importance of our sectors and our workers.
Let's see if there's anything else we can tune into while we wait.
There are impacts, not just in Quebec and in Ontario, but across the country. That's the nature of our continental economy that we share with the United States. And that is why we will find new export markets. We will keep helping businesses. We will help SMEs and workers who are affected by tariffs. We understand how difficult this situation is and how tight things are for our businesses. We will also keep investing in the Canadian Armed Forces. We will invest to give them more equipment and more homes for Canadian Armed Forces personnel. In our view, these investments are crucial to protect our sovereignty and also to invest in our industrial capacity in Canada, including by supporting existing businesses in Quebec. I see that I don't have much time remaining, Mr. Speaker. It has been a pleasure
to showcase the federal government's measures and initiatives and to add some personal comment and perspective. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before questions and comments, order, it is my duty pursuant to Standing Order 38 to inform the House that the questions to be raised tonight at the time of adjournment are as follows. The Honourable Member for Calgary-Crowfoot, Finance. The Honourable Member for Carleton Trail Eagle Creek, Public Services and Procurement. The Honourable Member for Courtenay-Alberni, Health. Questions and comments. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I commend my colleague on his French. His French passes the test, but his government just doesn't. The crisis in the lumber industry has been ongoing since 2017. Once in a while, I visit the website of the Quebec Statistics Institute to see how many jobs have been lost and how many businesses have had to shut down. The last time I checked, 29 businesses had sporadic closures, and they were at great risk of full closure. 2,200 full-time jobs and 1,900 part-time jobs were impacted by the lumber conflict. But the government hasn't announced anything other than what they announced in August, which did not meet the needs or expectations of the lumber industry. I'd like to hear my colleagues' thoughts on the lumber industry because we haven't had any real significant announcements about support for that industry. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable colleague for his question. I agree that the lumber industry is incredible.
It's really bad today.
There
Holy
are
crap.
many companies in my riding like Elmstill Lumber and Lugwich Lumber in Nova Scotia. The lumber industry is essential in rural areas. I think that we could focus more on the ideas raised by all members in this place. All members' ideas could help us develop the right programs to help sectors
it
get
looks
through
like
these
it's back.
difficult.
Let's see. Nope. Should be back any second now.
With our conflict with the United States, but we need to focus on value added in the sector to ensure that it lasts into the future. And also we need mass timber, and that's important for Build Canada homes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And
You know what I guess we can do while we wait? We can
I'd
return
like
back
to
to
thank
OGGO.
Member Opposite.
Oh, wait, no, it's back. Okay. Security Committee's back. Here we go.
Starting with Minister Gary Anandasangaree, Minister of Public Safety, and Honourable Sean Fraser, Minister of Justice. You are most welcome. Dear Ministers, we will start with opening remarks from the Minister of Public Safety, and then we will also hear from the Minister of Justice. Mr. Anandasangaree, you have the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
I would like to first start by acknowledging that we're meeting on the traditional and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Merci pour l'invitation aujourd'hui.
Thank you for inviting me to talk about Bill C-22.
To acknowledge my colleague, the Honourable Sean Fraser. We've been working on this bill for a number of months, and also the officials here to support us. As a Minister of Public Safety, my top priority is to ensure every Canadian remains safe and secure. Since my appointment, I've heard clearly from law enforcement at all levels, municipal police services and the RCMP, as well as victims groups such as the Canadian Centre for Child Protection. They've all said Canada needs modern tools to take on the wide array of illicit activities that are facilitated by the global digital environment. Technology has fundamentally changed the nature of crime and threats globally. Criminals are continuously exploiting digital space we all use to facilitate a wide array of offenses. This includes extortion, childhood exploitation, auto theft, terrorism, and human trafficking. Furthermore, this environment is being used to facilitate foreign interference and violent extremism. Our laws have simply not kept pace with our digitally driven world. This has created a significant gap between today's crimes and threats and what our current laws can meaningfully address. Nous avons le devoir envers.
We owe it to Canadians to tackle these new threats.
C-22 aims to do. It's worth taking this opportunity to highlight that Bill C-22 does not aim to regulate the Internet, police activity on the Internet, or require Internet service providers to become agents of the government, as some in the debate in the House has suggested. As our officials have confirmed, C-22 is encryption neutral. It is simply to address gaps in our legal framework that present challenges to timely access to information and intelligence that are vital to conducting investigations. It will give our officers the tools they need to keep Canadians safe in the 21st century while ensuring we continue to uphold Canadians' charter and privacy rights. Nous avons écouté les prières.
We have heard the concerns of stakeholders and other parliamentarians after Bill C-22 was tabled. 22 includes important safeguards, such as limiting the scope of confirmation of service demand to telecommunications service providers, a narrow definition of subscriber information, and strong judicial oversight. Police will still require court approval to obtain personal details like names, addresses, and phone numbers. Under Part 2 of the bill, will ensure electronic service providers can fulfill lawful access requests. Let's be clear. This part does not create new authorities for law enforcement agencies and CSIS to intercept communications or obtain information. Its focus is to ensure electronic service providers are able to comply with existing legal orders, which are found in the Criminal Code and the Canadian Security Intelligence Service Act. Key elements include a new compliance framework that will require core providers to have the technical capability to comply with legal authorization to obtain information such as warrants and production orders. It also gives new ministerial order powers to the Minister of Public Safety. Only with the approval from the Intelligence Commissioner, the Minister could order an electronic service provider to develop specific technical capabilities, for example, to address new technologies that are developed and not captured in the regulations. Finally, it introduces regulatory enforcement tools such as administrative monetary penalties for any provider who does not comply. Mr. Chair, once again, I wish to underscore the safeguards that would be in place under this part of the bill. As I mentioned, all ministerial orders will require prior approval from the Intelligence Commissioner to ensure they're reasonable. This part also includes an explicit safeguard to prevent the introduction of systemic vulnerabilities in electronic protections. Our government does not support the creation of backdoors. We want Canadians to see exactly how these powers are being created and used to ensure their implementation is subject to the highest levels of democratic scrutiny. Under our current laws, our police and intelligence officers are trying to fight tech-savvy criminals and state actors with tools that are decades old. Bill C-22 bridges that gap while it upholds the charter rights and privacy of all Canadians. Merci, et il me fera plaisir de répondre à vos questions. Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to answering your questions.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. Mr. Fraser, you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Before starting, I would like to thank everyone for being here for this very important debate. It is important to understand the context of this bill, in my opinion. There is a strategy to address public safety, which includes 3 pillars. The first thing is strengthen criminal laws, including C9, C14, C16. At the same time, we recognize that it's not enough to change the criminal code, but we also have to support the people working on the ground in our communities, community organizations, and police officers as well. it's not fair to simply add the number of people working on that. But we need to add more tools to make sure that those people have the capacity to meet expectations.
Of officers who are on the ground. Nous avons besoin aussi de faire des
We also need to carry out investigations to prevent violent crimes in the long term, including affordable housing, medications for people with mental illnesses, support young people with problems.
On that second pillar, supporting those who are on the front lines, trying to make Canada safer every day. And we can't expect people to address modern challenges with outdated technologies. This is where this bill comes in. When we compare Canada to other partners around the world, we are significantly behind when it comes to addressing modern challenges, particularly in a digital context. Technology has changed, the world has changed, and crime has changed. It is faster moving, it crosses borders, and it is digital on an increasing basis. What we've seen with other jurisdictions is they have embraced what we are discussing and calling lawful access. Very simply put, it's the ability of law enforcement to get access to the evidence that they need that may be digital in nature, the same way that we would allow them to get access to evidence that exists in the physical world. You can't arrest an IP address or a phone number. We need to give tools to ensure that law enforcement has the ability to figure out where there is a criminal investigation going on, who is the person behind it, and how can they advance that investigation. When I look at the actual process that we've laid out, I think it's important that we demonstrate to Canadians that we have put in significant thought into ensuring that privacy rights are protected at the same way that we embrace the recommendations of law enforcement to make it easier for them to do their jobs. In particular, to start off, what we're allowing under this legislation is for law enforcement to make a simple request when they have an investigation involving a phone number or an IP address, just to ask, is this on your network to a service provider? If the network comes back and says, yes, in fact it is, that would allow us to move forward with a process that would be approved by a judge to say, yes, there is a person with a name and an address that's attached to this. Currently, this process can take months. And when we're dealing with people who are involved in criminal organizations, engaging in child sexual exploitation, engaging in drug trafficking and human trafficking, organizing home invasions and auto theft rings, you can appreciate the need to move quickly is essential if we're going to reduce the ultimate consequences of crime to Canadian communities. This bill, in my view, provides the appropriate framework that empowers law enforcement to have the tools they need to keep Canadians safe, but puts protections in place to ensure that where appropriate, judicial authorization remains essential, and to ensure that we put a system in place so service providers actually do hold the information that is going to help facilitate these investigations. If I could perhaps sum it up simply, we are not going to solve Netflix problems with blockbuster technology. We have to join the advanced economies in the world who have been working to solve these problems for many years, and with the support of different parties at this committee, I think we have the potential to send a strong signal to Canadians that when it comes to public safety, we are going to make absolutely sure law enforcement have the tools that they need to keep Canadians safe. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci à vous deux, ce qui nous permet de passer la parole.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to Mr. Caputo for 6 minutes.
Mr. Chair, thank you to the ministers and officials. I'll note that we have 2 Kamloopians at the table here today, which is always wonderful. Minister Anandasangaree, you're off the hook today. We won't be asking you about visa and who gave people from the IRGC a visa. We're going to stick to C-22 here. I want to go into something that you mentioned, Minister. You talked about this is encryption neutral. One of my greatest concerns I'm hearing about is on encryption. And please don't defer to the analyst. What I want to hear your perspective on this. This bill could threaten encrypted communications based on the way it is written, the way some people are reading it. Can you confirm that the purpose of this bill is not to go after end-to-end encryption, as in party A is using a program to deal with party B that is encrypted? There's no way to decrypt it. Can you confirm that that is not what is in this bill, nor is it the intent of this bill?
I can confirm that, yes.
Okay. Now, And then to just ensure, like, one step further, nobody, if company A, there's no requirement for company A then from point 1 to point 2 to create what some would call a backdoor. I know that that's been to create a mechanism by which that information can be accessed. Is that accurate as well?
And then I addressed that in my initial opening.
Okay. If there's any ambiguity on that, I trust you would support an amendment to close that, because this is a game changer when it comes to that bill. I take that to be the case.
So I would say what I told you privately, Mr. Caputo. We brought this bill forward with a number of engagements, including with colleagues in different parties. We will work in collaboration to strengthen the bill. And if there are specific recommendations that this committee comes up with, we will certainly take it under consideration, and we look forward to that engagement to get to the right result.
Now, I'll be blunt, Minister. The Liberal government now has a majority. There is a concern that if there is that room there, that won't be addressed. That's why I'm asking you on the record, if there's a chance that encrypted communications can be targeted by this bill, if that's not the intent of the bill, that's what you said, I don't think it's too much to say, yes, Mr. Caputo, I would support an amendment to ensure that our intent is clear. For instance, an amendment that includes the definition of encrypted data in Part 2, and an amendment that says a systemic vulnerability includes a key to encrypted data, the creation thereof. Like, I don't think that's a difficult one, Minister, with all due respect, to say, yes, that's our intent. Do you not agree?
What I will repeat is that we are willing to work together in collaboration in advancing the bill. I was in the Senate yesterday on Bill C-8. 75% of the amendments that were passed were opposition amendments. They weren't government amendments. On this bill, I think we've been very clear, both of us, that we will work with opposition, as we have on every other bill, to advance and strengthen the bill.
The difference between C-8, though, Minister, if you want to get into C-8, that is exactly my cautionary tale. Just about every amendment that was of consequence, the Liberals voted against. It was the Conservatives and the Bloc that voted for those amendments, that swayed those amendments, with the government often voting against them. Now, things have changed. So with all due respect, C-8 is not a great example to use. That's why I'm trying to get it on the record. I think I've made my point. You've made your point. Let's move on. The ministerial order is one of the biggest things. Well, one of them I said was encryption. Another major issue is the degree to which enforcement and definitions are left to regulation. That's one of the primary criticisms of this bill. You know, I look at Section 5, for instance. This is sweeping powers. Section 5(2) sub B, the installation, use, operation, management, assessment, testing, and maintenance of any device. Sub D, the retention of categories of metadata, including that. Now, Minister, I get why the government wants things to be broad, you know, because then you can account for things. But should we not be defining things where we can be defined? Because I'm pretty sure we're going to have experts that say, you know what, we can define categories of metadata. I'm sure we can define categories of metadata. Those don't change every day. Would you be open to an amendment that says, yeah, when we're looking at taking information from people over which there's a high expectation of privacy, I trust you would support an amendment that would define those types of things?
I'm going to just, you know, go back to my initial position, Mr. Caputo. Specific amendments that you propose, we will consider them, and I will personally engage with you on this. However, I don't think preemptively I am going to agree to amendments that you're proposing here, and I'm not going to. It would be irresponsible for me to say I will accept all of these amendments. I think what's important is we look at it, we look at the implications on the bill, and we'll be more than glad to give you our feedback as I've always had.
Thank you for that respectful and useful exchange, Madam Sodi, for 6 minutes, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker. It's been a long day. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our ministers for attending before us today. Minister Anandasangaree, in Brampton, we have seen a concerning rise in crime, any and all types, from car thefts to robbery to break-in enters to murders and shootings in broad daylight. I'm worried about the safety of my constituents and all residents of Brampton, as they are as well. Our Mayor, Patrick Brown, and Peel Regional Police Chiefs have been calling for legislation like Bill C-22 and have welcomed this bill's introduction. With that local context in mind, can you describe the specific threats this bill is designed to respond to and the real-world operational gaps that law enforcement and CSIS face today that Bill C-22 would close?
Thank you, and look, let me acknowledge the work of Peel Regional Police in informing us on the development of this bill. It's been quite critical, and I've had a conversation with Chief Nish Durep on a number of occasions. This is the number one priority as indicated by police leaders, not just in Peel, but across Canada at every level, whether it is Commissioner Carrick in Ontario with the OPP or Commissioner Duhem at the RCMP, as well as regional police services. So this is of critical importance. In a granular sense, the technology that we have today is inadequate to deal with the type of issues we're dealing with, primarily telephones, internet, emails, and other electronic devices are used on a day-to-day basis for the execution of crime. Issues of extortion, for example, is oftentimes is by way of a phone call or a text, or sometimes it's by email. And all of these have, over the years, meant a great deal of delay for law enforcement to be able to get the production orders. Oftentimes they'll have to wait weeks, sometimes months, to be able to get the information that will enable them to go to the next step. So essentially what we're doing here, and I use the example of phone directory or Bowers reverse lookup, which can be found at a local library. If you have a phone number, you can go to the Bowers directory, put the phone number in, and you will get the address of the individual who owns the phone number. Right now, oftentimes these are anonymous, so which means that we need to go to the service provider. So if it is a telco, we need to go to the telco and say, is this particular telephone number associated with your service? And it takes sometimes weeks, sometimes months to get that information. What Bill C-22 will do is, as a starting point, will enable law enforcement to get what's called confirmation of service, that will say this individual or this phone number is attached to the service that we provide. Once that information is obtained, either a yes or a no, if it's a no, the matter stops there. If it's a yes, then a production order, a warrant will need to be prepared, seeking subscriber information on the individual whose phone number may be associated with that telephone company. And based on the warrant, we will get basic subscriber information, which would be name, email address, and so on. Beyond that, any additional information that's required will be back to what we do right now, which is, again, to go back to court, all under judicial authorization, to be able to get the type of information that's required for that investigation to continue. So essentially, it will draw an investigation which could take months into weeks based on the additional provisions that are provided within this bill.
And Minister, you said that you had discussed heavily with Chief Nish from Peel Police. Do you find that this is the consensus that police jurisdictions from all over Canada are wanting Bill C-22?
I would say we've had a number of engagements. So the Honourable Murray Rankin engaged in some mediation sessions and advised us on kind of near consensus. I wouldn't say it was consensus, but it had civil liberties organizations, industry. We had law enforcement as well as community advocates in different conversations. What we have here is an area where I think there's a great deal of understanding and acceptance. It's not perfect. Not everyone is 100% behind this. There are concerns that people continue to express, but by and large, this reflects even law enforcement. We've had to curtail, and you'll see some significant changes in Bill C-22 that is in C-2, for example, narrowing and defining certain aspects of what is included. So we've done an enormous amount of work to build what we think is as close to consensus we can. We won't get full consensus. And I think the work that we need to do is to make sure that all the safeguards are in place. We're fully confident that both privacy and charter concerns are addressed in this bill. Some would like to have us go more. Some would like us not to have a bill whatsoever. And that is not an option for us.
Thank you very much for that, MP Sodi. Madame de Bellefeuille, pour 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, ministers. I don't really have a question for you, Mr. Fraser, but I congratulate you on your French. There's been great improvement. Congratulations on your French. Mr. Minister, the Supporting Authorized Access to Information Act in Part 2 of the bill does not provide for any explicit role for the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency. However, in many of our partners in the Five Eyes community, there's comparable legal access mechanisms accompanied by a formal role for independent oversight. For example, in Australia, the Telecommunications and Other Legislation Amendment Assistance and Access Act provides that the counterpart agency must be notified of the issuance of technical assistance orders. But in Bill C-22, you present a report 1 hour later, an unredacted report 1 year later, and you have, I believe, 90 days to submit that. And it's about 1.5 years after the decision that you would submit the report to CIRA. Why don't you learn from the Five Eyes group and ensure that the agency has a similar strong role as Australia did to the comparable agency there? I would like to understand why.
Merci pour la question, Madame.
Thank you for the question.
Of safeguards that have been built into C-22. So, for example, on ministerial orders, there's a requirement to get acceptance of the Intelligence Commissioner before an order could be issued. There are provisions for a judicial review in certain circumstances. There's also a reference to NCIRA post facto, and this is the ordinary review process.
Je m'excuse de vous interrompre.
I'm sorry for interrupting you. I read that. I did my homework. What I want to understand is why is NCIRA somewhat ignored, in my opinion? I know that the Intelligence Commissioner has a role. Why not notify the agency in real time? Because it's being done about 1.5 years later. Why don't you want to make sure that the RCMP and the related agencies comply with the law? I proposed an amendment to make sure that CIRA be notified in real time, copying from Australia. I consider that it's a guarantee. It's the trust we are giving the government to make sure that the surveillance agency, whose primary role is to carry out reviews, and why are they not notified? I was surprised that Ms. Deschamps, who is the president of the National Security and Intelligence Review Agency, wasn't consulted on Bill C-22. So sincerely, in my opinion, it makes no sense. We are learning from the Five Eyes when it comes to best practices, but no important, significant role was accorded to the agency in Bill C-22. Why not notify the NCIRA in real time?
I would say in part, in order to move forward on a ministerial order, the timeline for it to go through the NCIRA review process could be quite significant. So it is a safeguard that's built in. The role of the Intelligence Commissioner, as you're aware, there's a lot more real-time responses and the ability of the Intelligence Commissioner to give that feedback. So there is that safeguard is there, so the Intelligence Commissioner could, approve or not approve a proposed order.
Qu'est-ce qui empêche de notifier l'office? C'est ça que je comprends.
Why not notify the agency? I don't understand why you're excluding them. That's their primary mission, to review, and you are setting them aside. You only inform them 1 year after the fact. I'm repeating my question. I will present the amendment. I know that you were open in the House of Commons. You were open to amendments. So for me, it's not complicated that you don't notify the Office of the President of NCIRA. Just like Australia, you seem to resist this fact. Do you have any arguments against my amendment?
I did meet with both the Intelligence Commissioner as well as the Privacy Commissioner as well as the chair of NCIRA. So there's been a number of engagements that I have done on my personal level and on top of the engagement that our departments have undertaken. What I would say is that we don't believe that NCIRA can provide in a timely manner the required acceptance or rejection of a particular ministerial order, just given, in some cases, the urgency of the matter. That's why the Intelligence Commissioner is being utilized in this regard. The role of NCIRA is always as a review, post-facto review agency, and this legislation is in line with the way NCIRA is currently operational, which is to review matters and to report back on potential errors, potential omissions.
Juste pour vous interrompre, Monsieur le Ministre, vous savez.
Sorry to interrupt you. You know that the presidency, the president of that office is not in agreement with their interpretation. She informed members that she felt that should be notified or informed at least when there are ministerial orders. She should be informed at the same time as the commissioner. So I think it's important that the agency play a greater role to gain the trust of the public. That's my opinion. Thank you very much, Madame de Bellefeuille. Madame Kirkland, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Ministers, I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate what you say about supporting our frontline officers. The call for lawful access has been one that's been called for a lot of years. I do think, though, we have to be careful, and we have to be careful not to rush something through. We need to get it right, and we need to balance our duty as parliamentarians, our duty of care, that we are protecting the privacy of Canadians. So my questions will be based on that. I think we have to be careful not to race to royal assent. We have to do this right. More than a decade ago, actually, I don't know if you're aware of this, but your party warned against a bill very similar to this, a lawful access bill. They said it risked turning Canada into a surveillance state. Today, you are advancing similar powers, but actually in a more expansive form with Bill C-22. In fact, Minister Francis Scarpelleja, who is our current Speaker of the House, but at the time was the Liberal public safety critic, warned that similar lawful access legislation, in his words, risked creating an Orwellian to do this right. More than a decade ago, actually, I don't know if you're aware of this, but your party warned against a bill very similar to this, a lawful access bill. They said it risked turning Canada into a surveillance state. Today, you are advancing similar powers, but actually in a more expansive form with Bill C-22. In fact, Minister Francis Scarpelleja, who is our current Speaker of the House, but at the time was the Liberal public safety critic, warned that similar lawful access legislation, in his words, risked creating an Orwellian service state. So my question to you is, was he wrong?
I will say that successive governments have failed to advance lawful access as a very important tool and framework that is required.
Yeah, I'm aware that I'll interrupt you. I'm aware that it has failed to continue. My question is, has the Liberal government changed their position than what they had over a decade ago, or do you believe that Mr. Scarpellegia was incorrect at that time?
I mean, this is not about Mr. Scarpellegia, Ms. Kirkland. Like, this is about the safety and security of Canadians. As you're aware, Canada's new government, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, undertook to ensure that, as Mr. Fraser aptly outlined, the three pillars.
Okay.
And this is a very important part of that pillar.
I'm going to
maybe
move on.
Sean could add.
I'm going to get to questions for Mr. Fraser momentarily. Minister Anandasangaree, can you give any assurances that this legislation, as it is written, will not be used in ways to go beyond original intent? I've heard department officials say the bill is not intended to do X, Y, Z. However, if the bill allows the government to do those things, what is to prevent a future government who maybe has a different approach to privacy and civil liberties than you from abusing that power?
I will say a lot of thought has been put into ensuring that the safeguards are in place, both from a privacy perspective, but also to ensure that it is charter compliant. So we are very confident that the bill as presented does have those safeguards.
Okay, so at the time, over a decade ago when we tried this before, there were warnings that rushing complex surveillance laws without properly gauging Canadians' views could lead to failure. You mentioned that you were very confident that privacy and safety is addressed in the bill as it is currently. Your government relied on consultations led by Murray Rankin to inform Bill C-22, yet you have not released that report. Will you release Mr. Rankin's report and share it with this committee?
I would say that Mr. Rankin's report, and I'm grateful for the work that he has done, it was prepared. He's a lawyer. We're both colleagues. It is presented to me, and I've used and Mr. Fraser has used it through me to inform our decision. This is the bill right now is not about Mr. Rankin's report. So what I would say is,
sir, I just wanted to ask: is that a no? Then you will not release the report to the committee,
I'm
or
seeking
yes,
privilege. I'm seeking privilege on that matter, and I don't believe that will be released.
Over a decade ago, the Liberal government warned that government rhetoric shut down meaningful debate on that iteration, Bill C-30's lawful access provisions. Yet today, this committee is being asked to study similar powers without access to the consultation report that informed how to proceed with lawful access reform in Bill C-22. That report is essential to any meaningful scrutiny and Parliament's ability to do its basic legislative function. By withholding it, your government is effectively asking MPs to approve legislation without full disclosure of the evidence behind it. So why are you, sir, refusing to release this report while insisting we move forward with these powers?
I would say
why are you insisting?
Well, if I may answer.
Thank you. I want you to just answer that question.
Well, you had a preamble. I should be able to give you a wholesome response. So if I may, what I would say is that as a normal course of bringing a bill forward, there are a number of different pieces of information that a department relies on to develop the legislation and getting the requisite authorities in order to bring forward legislation. Vast majority of the time, none of this information is disclosed. That is part of the decision-making of the government. You're welcome, Ms. Kirkland.
Merci, Monsieur le Ministre. Désolé, sorry to interrupt both of you. But we now need to turn to MP Casey for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I was in Parliament the day that Francis Scarpellegia went after Vic Taves with respect to the lawful access legislation at the time. And I distinctly remember Minister Taves saying, "You're with the government or you're with the child pornographers." And I remember the proliferation of the hashtag #TellVicEverything, because there was a widespread perception at the time that the legislation was an overreach. And right across the country, there were people that were providing Minister Taves with information about spilling soup on their tie because they felt that perhaps Vic was interested in everything with the measures that he was taking to trample privacy and the over-the-top rhetoric that was being used at the time to support it. I'd like to bring Minister Fraser into the conversation. Minister, in your opening remarks, you talked about the protection of privacy and compliance with the Charter in that regard. And I know Minister Anandasangaree Anandasangaree.
Yes.
I'm sorry, Minister. Perhaps I'll just call you Minister. Hopefully we won't get confused because there's two of you there. Mr. Fraser, can you talk a bit more about the protection of privacy and the compliance with Charter and the efforts that have been made in this legislation to do the two?
Yeah, and look, maybe just to help us get there, I want to provide a little bit of context. I know Ms. Kirkland, when she led her questions, talked about this debate going for a few years. It hasn't just been going for a few years, it's been going for 30. I would invite everybody to watch the video of Commissioner Carrique's summary of the importance of this bill upon the legislation being tabled. You can hear the frustration that is coming out of law enforcement, and I do think there is a consensus amongst law enforcement to move forward because they are very tired of criminal organizations responsible for human trafficking, for auto thefts, for drug trafficking, to know that there's this activity going on and to be trying to do their job with one hand tied behind their back. And when they're receiving tips from foreign governments in particular on something as sensitive as child sexual exploitation, they want to move. They do not want to invade people's privacy along the way, but thankfully we have had several evolutions in Canada and around the world that have demonstrated how we can better protect privacy. There's been some discussion at this committee about the differences between Five Eyes partners and Canada's approach. Of our Five Eyes partners, or France or Germany or Finland or Spain for that matter, none of them require judicial authorization in order to get subscriber information. We're talking about information that used to be in the phone book, and we're still requiring that a court actually approves access to that information. This is going to streamline access without compromising privacy in any significant way. If you want to go beyond that, even in exigent circumstances, the one exception where there is an emergency playing out where a crime could be stopped or evidence is going to be destroyed, there's even the opportunity on the back end. The test still has to be met, but the harm can be undone, so to speak, by a court excluding evidence should they need to, if in fact there was a privacy breach committed. Every step of the way, we've improved this, by the way, through the consultation process with different MPs from different parties and with experts who have said, you know what, you might actually want to ring fence what subscriber information you're looking for. So we have excluded medical information. We have excluded legal advice. This is about finding who is behind a phone number or IP address that we expect is tied to a criminal activity of one kind or another. At every step of the way, we tried to give law enforcement the tools they need to combat modern crime, but at every step of the way, we said, how are we going to do this in a manner that respects the reasonable expectation to privacy, which is protected by the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms? I'm convinced that we found the right balance after many years of debate, many months of discussion amongst parliamentarians of different parties, that strikes a balance that will allow us to defend the interests of Canadians, keep our communities safe, and respect the privacy rights of Canadians at the same time.
Minister Anandasangaree, do you have anything that you'd like to build on based on that answer that you just heard?
I think Mr. Fraser has captured the work that we've done and also the urgency. What I do want to underscore is as technology develops, and we know that we're already 30 years behind in this work, as technology develops with AI, with other tools at a scale and speed that, I don't think our world is quite ready for. The need for lawful access framework within Canada is so essential, at the very minimum to keep us to date and to evolve as new technology emerges.
Thank you very much for that. Madame de Bellefeuille, pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Minister, you confirmed to Mr. Caputo is that the intention of C-22 is not to allow for the creation of backdoors in encrypted systems, either now or in the future. Now, when we studied C-8 on the same issue, on the possible weakening of encryption. Minister Joly, responding to the question I put to her, said even though there was an intention expressed, she accepted to clearly include in the bill an article saying that there will be no decryption. Now, when it comes to decryption, this is a widespread fear. Maybe you can reassure the population by including in the bill an article or an amendment that clearly says that the encryption system will not be compromised. Do you believe that it's possible to further clarify your intention? Because when you were responding to Mr. Caputo, you clearly stated that was not your intention. Could you please further clarify this in the bill? Is there room for that?
Look, as I've indicated prior, I will, we will look at every amendment. There is an amendment-making process, so once you complete the work, there'll be recommendations that comes forward from the committee. The undertaking that I can give you is that we will look at every single one of those proposals, and we will give you the feedback. As always, I will engage with you. I will engage with Mr. Caputo and others as well who want to advance on this issue. So that's the commitment I can make to you today.
Juste pour, sans vous interrompre, mais à votre place.
In your place, when Minister Joly appeared before the committee, she committed to add an amendment that was tabled by the government party to add the fact that there will be no decryption. This is something she clearly stated during the study of Bill C-8. I'm asking you the same question. Are you ready to ask your team to find a way of adding to the bill certainty that will reassure the public that the encryption systems will not be undermined?
Madam, I've worked with you very closely now for almost a year, and I think you generally know the approach that I've taken as in collaboration. So I will certainly be willing to meet with you and look at the proposal you have. Anything to strengthen the bill, we would be more than glad to entertain.
Merci, Madame de Bellefeuille. Le député Lloyd pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the ministers for being here. Minister, you've refused to waive privilege on the report provided by Murray Rankin on the consultative process in this report. I've been told that this report has been widely shared with people who participated in the consultation. I'm assuming the fact that those people who have not shared the report have done so because they signed a non-disclosure clause. Can you confirm if the members of the consultation had to sign a non-disclosure clause in order to get access to the report?
Mr. Lloyd, I'm not sure if they did or not, but what I will say is that the conversation today is not about Mr. Rankin's report. It is about the bill that is in front of the House. And there is no precedent for governments to be sharing information that was gathered, discussions that took place to committee. I think we're really sidestepping what the real core issue that we're here to discuss, which is the bill itself.
Thank you. I've given you enough time on that, Minister. This report was critical in your government coming up with the report. And so I think, as members of Parliament, it would be very helpful for us to have access to this report. I think it's critical that governments try to build trust with Canadians. And I have to admit, what it looks like what you're doing here, Minister, is not accountable. It's not showing transparency, especially when we're dealing with very contentious legislation that deals with the privacy rights of Canadians. What are you hiding, Minister? Why are you refusing to share this report?
You're welcome to call Mr. Rankin to the committee, and he will be able to provide information. But what I will say is that what is happening right now is a bit of a distraction of what the core issue is, which is discussion on the bill itself.
Minister, you're making it a distraction by refusing to reveal the report. The very fact that we're talking about it today, even people who received the report, people who support C-22, people who are against C-22, they're baffled of why this report hasn't been revealed. It's becoming a distraction because you're making it a distraction, Minister. Why not just reveal the report?
The matter is not about the report, Mr. Lloyd. You know this. This is about the bill itself. The bill is presented by myself and Mr. Fraser. If you have specific questions about the bill, I will be more than willing to answer, but I'm not willing to answer you on privileged information that I believe I sought from Mr. Rankin, which informed our decisions. But there's also a number of other individuals that I met, Mr. Fraser met. We consult people on a a range of people on developing a bill.
Why should the Minister, I've given you plenty of time to respond. Why should the stakeholders who participate at the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, other stakeholders, why do they have more of a right to see what is in this report than members of Parliament who are being asked to vote on this legislation?
So I will, as I said, if you would like to invite Mr. Rankin to testify, you're more than welcome to do so.
Okay, I'm going to move on, Minister. I was talking to your officials before. There seems to be a contradiction. The legislation says it's not intended to weaken encryption or create systemic vulnerabilities, and yet there's other parts of the legislation that are saying a ministerial order is intended to create the very technical capabilities in order to get through this encryption. So I ask, if the outcomes desired by this legislation, that being lawful access, cannot be accessed without creating systemic vulnerabilities, will your government still order telecoms providers and other ESPs to create these encryption capabilities?
As I said initially, this bill is encryption neutral. It does not envision and it does not anticipate breaking of encryption in any way. What I will say, the ministerial orders, as contemplated, will require the Intelligence Commissioner to approve, which is part of, I think, the safeguard that's in place right now.
You know, in response to my question during debate regarding compensation for providers, you were pretty blunt. You said as a condition of CRTC licensing, you expect companies to comply without compensation. Is that an accurate depiction of what you said in the House?
What I will say is...
was it accurate, yes or no? Sorry.
Mr. Lloyd, I don't recall. But
okay.
I will say that I have commented on this, so I can...
And you're saying no to compensation, just be clear.
What I will say is that this bill, there is a world in which compensation is possible, but my view is that companies that are operating in Canada are good corporate citizens. Five Eyes countries do not necessarily
So that's very different from the answer you gave in the House. What situations do you think compensation could be provided?
I would say at this point, I don't anticipate any particular situation, but if there are extenuating circumstances where a company's financial position may be limiting, that is a one-off consideration, but by and large, we do not anticipate compensation to be provided.
Thank you, MP Lloyd. MP Akan for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr.
That'll be it for this because the lib round is like the end of it. They don't have time for any more rounds, so we don't need to sit here and listen to the lib for the last 5 minutes. We can just call it here, and yeah, we got obviously you guys know on Wednesdays the House opens up at 2 p.m. so we'll be starting with question period. I haven't checked to see. I think what we're going to do in the afternoon is the Justice Committee. Because that's obviously been a bit of a gong show recently, so we'll see if it even like if they adjourn early, if they go in camera. But there's not too many committees on anyway tomorrow after question period. But we'll probably just cover the Justice one. It's on at 4:30, so we'll have a bit of a break in between question period and committee. But yeah, so we'll leave it there. Thanks everyone for tuning in and watching. Have a fantastic rest of your evening. Thank you, Wee Cookie, for the super chat. Really appreciate you. And I will see you guys all tomorrow. Bye, guys.